Hi, my name is Nick Girardi, and you're watching How to Play Paintball. So a little introduction about myself. My name is Nicholas Girardi. I'm a fourth-year transfer student at Florida Atlantic University. I'm the president of the school's paintball program and have been for the last couple of years. Before that, I went to the University of Florida and was a part of their paintball program for about 2 years. So a little bit of how I know Greg. When I first started playing paintball, it was about the year 2011, and Florida Atlantic University had already been a team for a few years now. Greg was one of the forefathers of the organization. He was one of the first people to bring FAU paintball into something from nothing. So without Greg, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have transferred schools, I wouldn't have fixed my shoulder, I wouldn't be playing paintball right now if it wasn't for Greg. Today, for my first lecture, I wanted to talk about sprinting. Sprinting is still something that you see a lot of professional athletes doing wrong, and it's something that I only recently started learning and perfecting. The teacher that taught me how to sprint is my kinesiology professor. His name is Coach Ian Pika, and he was a track and field Olympian for the year that we boycotted the Olympics in Russia. He actually told me a lot of information that as an athlete, I haven't known my entire life. He's also responsible for the programming that I'm going to get into, which is for strength and conditioning, tactical strength and conditioning, things like that. Without him, I wouldn't have any of this information to bring you. Before we could get into sprinting, you have to talk about running, and before you talk about running, you have to get into walking. So walking is classified as 60% stance and 40% swing. And to get into running, you want to reverse the percentages. So 60% is swinging and 40% is stance. Running is classified as when both feet are off the ground for a certain amount of time. Both feet have to be in the air for it to be classified as running. Now that we've talked about walking, running, and sprinting, I want to talk about placement off break. For sprinters, this would be where they're on the blocks. So for paintball, this is on the break, this is lined up with your gun touching the bunker, waiting for the buzzer to sound. In order to have proper off-break placement, you want to have symmetry, where, like, just as you're walking, just as you're running, your left hand moves in the same direction that your right foot would be walking. So it would be your right hand and left leg. Off the break, you want to be symmetrical, just like you're going to start running. You still see a lot of players lined up with their right arm back along with their right leg, opening their stance. And what that does is once the buzzer actually sounds, their upper body has to do an extra half rotation just to get in line with the rest of your body. And in order to put proper force into the ground, your body needs to be symmetrical, it has to be in line, and it has to be in a position where it could exert all of its force into the ground. With your stance incorrect, you are unable to do so. Now I'm going to get a little bit more in-depth on positioning. For foot placement, what you want to do is you want to have your feet in line in the direction that you're running. You don't want them to be to the left and to the right, but you want them to be straight. You want to exert all your force down and forward. Your next few steps is actually when your feet start to widen like ducks. That's when you use the external rotators in your leg to actually add more force into running. Off the blocks, your feet are going to be straight, and then your next few steps are going to be like ducks. Another thing to take in consideration before you actually start running is inertia, and this has to do with body placement off break. So right now, you're in that low position where your barrel is touching behind you, your feet are in line with your hands, and you're sitting there really low. But what you want to do is you want to get your body as high as possible so that inertia has less of a force on you. If you've ever watched football or sumo wrestling, when someone goes to tackle someone, they often start a lot lower than the other person. Their center of gravity is a lot lower, they're closer to the ground, and they're a lot harder to move than if they were just standing upright, standing higher, standing with their center of balance between their legs, center of mass, all that. When it comes to inertia in paintball, you want to have your butt really high, just like a sprinter, before you start running. What you want to do is you want to lean forward a little bit also. But if you lean too far forward and the buzzer holds you for an extra half second, you will false start, because that first step is like you're kind of falling into the step. You're kind of falling, your legs are exerting force. And off the brake, and I'm comparing this to sprinters that are on the blocks. On the blocks, a sprinter will put 300 pounds of force into the ground to start going. I don't know if you could actually do that for paintball, but the same concept applies. You want to put all that force down into the ground and behind you to get that first step going, but you also want to be a little bit higher off the ground so that your upper body isn't weighing so much into your legs as it is into your next step. Now let's talk about leg placement. So when you're running, your leg placement actually has something to do with air pressure, with wheels. So the bigger a wheel is, the harder it is to get it turning than a wheel that's this big. For a wheel to come all the way around your leg in the largest position it can, it's going to be a little bit slower, it's going to have air resistance. What sprinters do is they tuck their leg into their butt and then they whip it around, and then they actually extend their leg so that it could touch the ground. What this does is it brings air pressure out of the mix, and moving a smaller wheel is a lot faster than moving a bigger wheel. This brings me into my last tip for actually the exercise of sprinting, or the movements of sprinting, and that's for those first few steps, you're going to actually want to pull the ground with a longer stride. What this does is it uses your hamstrings to create something called a ground force reaction. A ground force reaction is when, per se, you pulling the earth causes the earth to push you in that direction. What a lot of paintball players to this day are still doing, and a lot of athletes in sprinting sports, is they just lean forward and they're just pushing the ground as hard as they can. Yes, they could be some of the fastest athletes in the world, but are they doing it correctly? No. There's a faster way of doing it to get you from 0 miles per hour to your top speed. And that's with your first 3 steps out of the blocks. Out of the blocks, your stride is going to be a lot longer. You're going to pull the ground and then start pushing. And then after 2 to 3 steps is when you get into your solid running, where you're just pushing, running as normal. So if you ever watch sprinters, you'll see off the blocks, their first few steps are really big, really powerful, and then they just turn the switch and start running as fast as they can. So now I'm going to talk about a little bit of the exercises that you could do to improve sprinting, improve your strength, improve your form. The Mac Daddy of all weightlifting exercises is known as the squat. Squatting will increase all of the muscles in your leg, eccentrically, concentrically, you name it, everything. It'll increase the muscle size of your back, it'll do everything for you. The next exercise that you want to look into is using the cable fly machine. So with cable flies, you could tuck your leg into that tucked position that we were talking about to make the wheel smaller, add some weight to it, and practice going forwards and going backwards with resistance. This is to mainly strengthen your hip flexors and hip extensors, and to get your leg used to that crunched position close to your body. Other exercises you could do include things like hamstring curls using the machines. Those will really help your hamstring performance and get you really able to pull the ground. You also want to do lunges, both forwards, backwards, and left and right, just to improve the overall strength of your leg and improving how your leg reacts to shock and reacts to force. The last thing that you could do is a warm-up, say right before you're going to start sprinting. You're going to want to get on one leg, and you're going to want to hop in the direction that you're running, but when you're hopping, you want to practice pulling the ground. Doing this over time, you'll see that eventually your stride increases with one leg. You'll be able to jump from 2 feet to then 3 feet and then 4 feet with each pull of the earth. Once again, my name is Nicholas Girardi here with How to Play Paintball. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back with more.